same person that you were 20 years ago? All right, some of you weren't even born. Start over. Are you the same person that you were 10 years ago? Do you have all the same ideas, the same habits? Do you look the same? And if so, seriously, what is your secret? How about as recently as last year? Were you the same person then? Or how about last week? Or how about yesterday? Will you be the same person tomorrow? Well, you may have heard that every 7 years, every cell in your body regenerates itself. Now, this isn't strictly true. Some cells actually regenerate as often as every couple of days, whereas others only a couple times in your life. Either way, the physical makeup of what makes you you is constantly changing. And so in a literal sense, who you are today is different than who you were yesterday. And this is true psychologically as well. I mean, all day and all night, you've been gathering ideas and information that you didn't have yesterday, but in a very real way will become a part of a new you overnight as your brain synthesizes this information while you sleep. The point is, every night we transform into somebody else, a future you. So who is this future you? Well, in some ways, future you is a little bit like your parents because they're always judging your actions. I mean, if it wasn't for future me, I wouldn't have to feel so guilty about eating that third cookie. But in another way, and perhaps a more meaningful way, your future yous are like your children, in that they inherit a lot of your habits, a lot of your ideas, and they give us someone more important than ourselves to think about. You know, ideas are important because they're the lenses through which we experience the world. They set the limits on our behaviors. I mean, if you have the idea that it's wrong to break the law, well, you're a heck of a lot less likely to do so when presented with a problem. And we embody our ideas. I mean, you can learn a lot about somebody just by looking at their body language. This actually works the other way. The ideas we have about ourselves are partially determined by how we carry ourselves. There's a great TED Talk by a social psychologist named Amy Cuddy who talks about body language and power posing. And it turns out that if you adopt a powerful pose, you know, Superman or woman or whatever you prefer, for as little as 2 minutes, you can actually physically change your hormone levels, resulting in higher confidence and lower stress. In fact, ideas are so powerful, they can actually blind us to what's truly possible. Some years ago, after I gave up on a music career and moved back into my mom's basement, yeah, very cliche, I know. I didn't really feel very good about myself. And I had a pretty serious overeating problem. And yeah, didn't have much direction. So I figured I should probably do something about that. So looking around for inspiration, I noticed something. Every other animal on Earth, they just get to follow their natural instincts and they do pretty well. I mean, you don't see a lot of depressed squirrels walking around. And so I figured, heck, maybe I should try the same. And so I did. I listened to my body. I did whenever it told me to eat, I would eat. Whenever it told me to sleep, I would sleep. Whenever it told me to exercise, that didn't really come up. And just followed naturally what felt like the right thing to do. And after a couple of months, I actually had some really solid evidence for exactly how well that was working. I had gained another 20 pounds. I was constantly tired and simultaneously always hungry and felt massively depressed. I was so angry with myself and so disappointed. I mean, why was my body telling me to do things that weren't good for me? I mean, what was wrong with me? How could doing what feels natural be wrong? And then it hit me. I had the wrong idea. See, following your natural instincts only works if you're in the environment that those instincts were made for. And my body and my brain were built for a world that frankly no longer exists. And once I understood that, all sorts of behaviors and habits that I had that were holding me back became pretty obvious. I mean, once I understood that I would never feel normal, but that didn't mean that there was something wrong with me, well, that changed everything. I started eating better. I started exercising, all the time telling myself, you know, I know this doesn't feel normal, but I promise it's the right thing to do. And within 6 months, I had lost 60 pounds. Now, I still struggle every day with eating, but at least now I know why it's a struggle. Now, most of us already carry around the idea that it's good to eat well and exercise, so why aren't we all athletes? Well, once you've got the right idea, you still have to adopt the right habits, and so how do you do that? And for that matter, what are habits? Well, usually when someone says habit, they're really saying bad habit, right? But they're not all bad. They're just learned automatic routines. They're almost completely involuntary, sort of like programmable reflexes. And a lot of the habits that we have, we learned so long ago, we don't even recognize them as habits. I mean, how many of you drove here tonight? Oh, come on, yeah. You didn't all walk, let's be honest. Of those that drove, how many of you had a conversation with someone? Ideally, that was actually there. Think for a moment of how insanely complex that is. I mean, there's no way you were consciously thinking about every movement of your head and eyes to look, and your hands and your feet on the steering wheel and shifter and pedal, while simultaneously thinking about every movement of your diaphragm and jaw and lips and tongue to form every sound of every word of every sentence. There's just no way. Most of that was automatic. Most of that was habit. Habits are incredible and incredibly useful most of the time. But some of us, all of us still carry around some bad habits as well. I mean, how many of us have ever eaten something that we know we probably shouldn't? Maybe a few hours ago in the lobby, they were good, all right? So, I mean, me too. So once you've identified a bad habit, how do you change it? Well, it turns out there's this great book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, where he breaks down habits into 3 pieces because before you change it, you have to understand it and study it. The 3 pieces are the cue, the routine, and the reward. And so I have a bad habit. When I work from home, I will get up every so often, maybe more often than so often, go to the fridge, eat something tasty, sit back down, and get back to work. And so, following Duhigg's advice, I started off by trying to identify the cue. And so what I did was every time that I felt that urge to get up and eat something, I would first write down the time, the place, my desk, what I was feeling, and what I was doing right before, because one of those was going to be the cue. And so I did that a few times, and it turns out that there was a pretty solid pattern. I was either in the middle of or just about to do a task that I didn't really feel like doing. And so obviously I just stopped doing tasks I didn't want to do, right? Perfect. No. But that was good information, right? That's a start. And so next I had to identify the routine, which in this case was pretty straightforward. Get up, go to fridge, eat, sit back down later. Now the reward, you'd think, would be equally obvious. Well, it's food, duh. Why'd you read a book to figure that out, right? But again, following Duhigg's advice, I experimented with different rewards and then wrote down how I felt. Did I still feel that urge to get up? And so one time I would get up, go to the fridge, drink a glass of water, sit back down, write down how I felt. Another time I would get up, go to the fridge, and have some vegetables. Sit back down, write down how I felt. Didn't repeat that one. Another time I'd get up, go right past the fridge, walk out the door, and take a walk. And you know what? By the time I came back, I knew that, at least in the case of this habit, I had it figured out because I didn't feel like getting up at all. I felt like working. I was just looking for a distraction. It happens. And so now I take walks. It turns out you can actually use this same framework to create a new habit. And so I wanted to start with something simple, washing the dishes. Now, I don't not wash the dishes, but we don't have a dishwasher at home. And so inevitably, dishes would pile up for a day, maybe 2, at most, Mom, if you're listening. And it would always hit that threshold right when it was as inconvenient as possible, like right after dinner when you just wanted to relax, or right before work when you were in a hurry. And so I decided that every time I put a dirty dish in the sink, the cue, I would wash all of the dishes in the sink, the routine. And then the reward would be, first of all, feel good about washing all the dishes, good for me, starting the habit. But I also got to escape that feeling of guilt every time I walked past that now empty sink. There was no more, oh yeah, no, I don't totally see that, let's just go over there, right? And I remembered to thank past me every time for giving me an empty sink to wash these dishes in. And so I did it over and over again. And after the first time, well, the sink was always empty, so it was actually pretty quick. Cool. And I knew I had established a new habit when a couple weeks in, I was finishing a glass of milk and walking to the sink. And I told myself, you know, you've been really good about this the last couple of weeks. It's only one glass. You know, no one's going to find out. You can just wash it when you get home. And in the middle of that conversation to myself, I looked down and I was already washing it. Learned automatic routines, right? And so now I wash the dishes. Now, of course, instead of a sink full of dirty dishes, I now have a dish rack full of clean dishes I have to deal with, but one habit at a time. And so, with all this talk about changing yourself, you might have a little voice in the back of your head saying, you know, I've been spending a lot of effort just trying to accept myself for who I am. Who the heck is this guy in the red circle saying, stop doing that, you're not good enough? No. You should totally accept yourself for who you are, because there's nothing you can do to change it. Who you are today was determined by thousands of choices, by thousands of past yous that, for all intents and purposes at this point, are dead and gone. No sense dwelling on it. No sense wasting your time thinking about it. But it's also important that we accept the responsibility for the nurturing and guidance of our future selves. That we think about what kind of habits, good or bad, we want them to have to live with, and what kind of ideas we want living inside of them. It's also important to take responsibility for ideas because they affect not only all of our future selves, but those of everyone else around us as well, because ideas are communicable. Literally, like right now, they spread through communication, right? And so it's important that we accept the responsibility for keeping the ideas that benefit everyone and getting rid of those that don't. It's also important to accept that you are only human. So please give yourself some slack. I mean, your bodies and your minds were built for a world that no longer exists. And it's getting less natural every day. Now, technology has done some wonderful things, as you have learned about microbiomes and such tonight, but it also has some seriously negative consequences that we're only beginning to understand. Now, carrying around these little casinos in our pockets is training us to have a short attention span and to expect instant gratification. And that's making us impatient with not only ourselves, but everyone around us. And that's not good, because real, meaningful change, well, that takes time, and that takes effort, and it's uncomfortable, but it's vital. Finally, remember to treat future you like there's somebody that you care about. Now, with all of this introspection and retrospection, it's easy to focus on our mistakes. It's a bad habit a lot of us have, which can really reinforce the idea that we're not as awesome as we actually are. But as dark as things can sometimes get, remember, you've got a reason to change and a reason to care. And all it takes is one small positive action to start a chain reaction. So when you go home tonight, do something nice for future you. And tomorrow, when the person you are today is gone, remember to thank that person for doing that nice thing. And not only that, but use that as a cue to do something nice for the next future you, and the next, and the next, making a habit out of it. Now, pretty soon, you're going to look around and realize, hey, this is what caring about myself looks like, which means that you are a person worth caring about. So who are you going to be tomorrow? Thank you.